thank you everyone for being here today. I'd like to call the Education and Youth Matters Committee to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Howard.
Present.
Alderwoman Ingracia.
Present.
Alderwoman Evans.
Present.
Alderman Page.
Present.
Alderman Stevens.
Present.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Present.
Chairwoman Green.
Present.
7 present. You have quorum.
Thank you. So today, we don't have any official business in front of us in terms of legislation, but wanted to take the opportunity to start a discussion amongst committee members and with what I hope will become the beginning of some better relationships between city government and St. Louis Public Schools. As we know from the past few months, in particular, our city is at a crossroads in a lot of ways. We're on the heels of some decisions to close some St. Louis public schools, and those decisions did not happen out of nowhere, and they did not occur in a vacuum. And my hope with this committee is that we can hear from St. Louis Public Schools today. We can hear from some other allies and parents and activists associated with St. Louis Public Schools, and this begins the beginning of some conversations to help us as a committee determine our future goals, our future legislation as we move forward. So first thing I wanted to do was just turn this over to first our school board president, Dr. Joyce Roberts, to come in front of us and present to us today, along with Dr. Adams. Give us a little bit of an update about the status of SLPS, some of the framework and visioning you've been going through, the calls to action that you have for us in city government, and get us all up to speed with all of the things that you've been working on.
Good morning, everyone. Chair Green and all the other aldermen and community stakeholders. I'm excited to accept this invitation on behalf of the board. Dr. Adams and I are here to share with you the state of the school district, and I will defer to him to begin the discussion with the recap, and I will join later on with some thoughts on the moratorium on schools. Dr. Adams.
Good morning. First of all, thank you very much. I'd like to do first to provide a PowerPoint presentation. Do I have the ability, Madam Chair, to share my screen?
Yes, you should have that ability.
Okay. Give me 1 second to do that, please.
The green button that shares screen on the taskbar at the bottom of your Zoom call screen.
Thank you.
Right now we're seeing your email. Or should we be seeing a PowerPoint? There we go.
Okay. All right. First of all, again, as the chair has indicated, board chair, Dr. Roberts, thank you for giving us an opportunity to present to you today where the district is. It is always a pleasure to try to provide as much information as possible, obviously, to the elected officials and the community relative to what the district has done, where the district is. And so I'd like to kind of walk you through. I had a prior conversation with the board chair, Alderwoman Green, and so she framed some things that she wanted me to cover. And it's my hope this morning that I and be able to cover those things, and obviously to be available for any kind of questions or concerns that the public might have, or the altar persons might have. First of all, what you see here is basically the kind of things I want to kind of cover: the state of the district, timeline over the last 18 months, the community visioning process, the COVID-19 temporary closing and impact, the consolidation and strategic school closing, some conversations about TIF, about the citywide planning, and as the Madam President indicated, Dr. Roberts, she's going to speak a little bit about the moratorium. And lastly, a call to action, how we think that the elected officials in the community could assist the district in a way that we think will be supportive of the students in our community. First of all, just a brief timeline of what has occurred. The Commission and State Board visited Clyde C. Miller. The State Board on the 16th convened to St. Louis and reinstated the elected board. As you all are aware, there was a special appointed board, state appointed board that had been in place for the last 12 years. That transition took place on June 2019. So the elected board is coming on 2 years of being in place as an elected board. And I'm going to kind of walk through board host a community safety forum in September 2019 after hearing cries from the community relative to the number of young persons whose lives have been taken by violence. That was done at Vashon High School. 2018-19, launched our Transformation Plan 3.0, which is a strategic plan for the district. February 29th, the board started a conversation with the community around community visioning, right sizing the district. March 2017, we extended the spring break and closed schools from March 2020. April was the first iteration of our virtual learning plan. A restart committee was put in place to provide some direction to the district. That restart team composed of parents, teachers, administrators, and central office employees. The district developed a COVID database and district contact tracing team to coordinate the vaccination events. This year, in July 7, 2021, summer school started, and then the intent is that school in person will begin in August 2021. As I indicated, the state board visited Clyde C. Miller, and after 12 years of being under the state appointed board, the members you see there were put in place as the elected board. Since that time, there have been some changes. Obviously, some elections have occurred, and the members that you see on the screen are not necessarily the same members today, but the elected board is still in place. This occurred after the district was unaccredited for a number of years, several years to be exactly, but the district is fully accredited at this point in time based on the academic achievement, based on fiscal climate of the district, and based upon the challenges around what occurred before around the elected board. The community visioning process started with the idea of asking the community to help us determine what needed to happen next. As you are aware, the student population in the population in the city of St. Louis has declined, and obviously the student population has also declined, but a process started around December with a series of meetings that took place managed by Emerging Wisdom that led the board to a recommendation, led administration to a recommendation that the board received for the closing of 7 schools. The board listened intently to the community. The board looked at all of the factors relative to why they needed to look at this notion of school consolidation. As a result of that, as I said before, a recommendation for 7 schools. This administration made a recommendation for 11 schools. The board decided that 7 schools would be consolidated, with 1 school moving from a high school, Carnahan, to a middle school. Again, a recap of the community vision process was like a 4-month process, 6 community visioning workshops. The purpose of the meeting is to gather community input, as I've already indicated before. As part of the process, participants learned about the current and evolving state of the district, identified the top priorities to help guide the district, and are reflected on the district's on a district's criteria for school closure and consolidation. a number of workshops, as I said before, took place with community input and attendance from the community relative to this consolidation process. And again, as I said before, the board subsequently took up the challenges from that community visioning process and made recommendations for closures of schools. As indicated before, because of the onset of the COVID pandemic, schools were closed in March of 2020. As a result of that, we had to quickly move to virtual instruction. We provided some 15,000 iPads to students, 6,000 laptops, and 4,000 hotspots to families. Really a daunting task as we provided that to the communities to make sure that kids can be online, continuously working. That ended the 2020-21 school year. We began the 21-22 school year with the idea of we ended the 2019-20 school year, and the 2021 school year, we started the school year with the idea that we could be in person. We quickly, because of the virus, remained virtual until October of 2021. With elementary students coming back to school, we did open an opportunity for instructional support centers, meeting those families who had the greatest need. We provided some 32 buildings open for those families, with our support staff providing the bulk of that instruction. And not until January of 2021 were we able to open all schools for all kids K through 12. Approximately 30 to 40% of the students were in person. Approximately 50% or 60% of families remain virtual until the end of the school year. Right now, we're running a summer school program that's 100% in person, with approximately 4,200 students who are coming to about 32 buildings on a regular basis. As I said before, it is our intent to be 100% in person next school year, based on the data that we see right now. This is kind of a recap of instructional support centers, 1,500 families who needed support, 18 food sites with over 300 meals to date that we provided. Our students provided supplies. We adjusted our bell times to accommodate the social distancing with temperature checks and mask wearing. PPE district-wide air filters put in place. In-house contact tracing teams, 5 persons internal to the district, constantly working to provide the kind of screening that was necessary. We held several vaccination events, screened all staff persons, and finally ended up this school year with the 2021 class graduating from Bush Stadium. Back up a little bit. And as you can see, this is the graduation event that was held at Bush Stadium. Last year, we were not able to hold a graduation event for students, so we were really joyous and pleased to be able to do that this year. The board proposed a moratorium on school openings in February. Why? Since 2003, over 47 SLPS schools have closed and over 15 charter schools have closed. Let me say that to you again. Since 2003, 47 SLPS schools have closed and 15 charter schools. The 7 schools that we just made recommendations for closing is part of that number. What says to me that there is a real challenge in our community if over 60 schools have to close over a 17-year period of time. And so the reason for the moratorium is for us to go back and think about what we are actually doing in this community. And so that's why the board called for a moratorium on February 9th. You can see Dr. Rhodey Collins was the president at the time, and it was a resolution to ask this community to rethink how we look at schools. In the moratorium, you see the language that frames 60,000 children in the 2007-8 school year, and right now 49,000 students. But the number of schools has increased from 103 to 110. So despite losing 17,000 students, there has been an uptick in the number of schools, including charter schools, in this community. So the math just does not make sense. And so that is why the board is asking for a moratorium. And Dr. Roberts will likely speak to that when I finish in the next 1 or 2 minutes. The last 2 things I think that are important, because as the chairperson asked me to kind of talk about the challenges, One of the real challenges is the notion of tax incremental financing, the impact of the financing on the St. Louis public schools, because obviously local tax is what drives the education of kids in most districts across this country, and St. Louis and Missouri are no different in that sense. You can give this is what our chief financial officer was able to put together. Since 2008, the amount of impact lost, a revenue impact lost as a result of TIFs. Now, we know what the argument is, and semi-support the argument that obviously builders and developers won't build in the city of St. Louis unless they get some kind of breaks as it relates to taxes in order to incentivize them to build. But at what cost? At what cost does that impact children? Over a 12-year period of time, over $126 million have been lost to the St. Louis Public School District as it relates to that. This is what we were able to put together. And then the question becomes, what's the return on investment? Is there a way to determine that the tax, the TIFs, if you will, have impacted in a positive way additional dollars coming in by increasing taxes in other ways? I think that's a question for the automatic committee, like the education committee, to take up to determine what the return of investment has been in that case. Lastly, the chair, Alderwoman Green, asked me to kind of talk about what's going on around this citywide planning. I'll frame two efforts that are taking place. On the left-hand side, SLPS charter schools form collaboratives to drive student success. In March of 2000, and February 9th, to be exact, of 2021, this publication was put out. Basically, what has happened is over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been constant conversations taking place with charters and the districts and other parties as well, quite frankly, sponsors like Washington University, like SLU, who sponsor charter schools. And we've been talking about what we needed to do to kind of work together around this whole notion of educating kids in the city of St. Louis, knowing that the resources was declining, knowing that resources, when I say resources in this case, I mean the number of students declining, knowing that we were not working really well together, sometimes being at odds on a regular basis. And that wasn't best for kids in the city of St. Louis. And so since the last year, we have been talking behind the scenes, formally announced in February that we are meeting on a regular basis to collaborate. One of the big collaboration points is the notion around the number of schools in the city. One of the things that we've been talking about is this notion around advocacy. How can we advocate for ourselves collectively? And one of the things, quite frankly, is special education services. So while on one end, this effort was taking place behind the scenes, now public, around citywide planning, there's an effort within charters, sponsors, and the district around this notion of collaboration. On the other end, I sent out an email to all of those parties who raised questions around why we closed schools. And so I set up a meeting with them on April the 15th. That would be groups like We Power, Forward to Ferguson, Bridge to Hope, Opportunity Trust, St. Louis Public Schools, and charters as well, to talk about what we needed to do as it relates to one specific topic, and that was around the number of schools in the city. Since that time, several meetings have taken place, and planning is taking place right now. Quite frankly, a representative of the city was at the table as well, Mr. Pinckney representing the city. And so there are two efforts taking place right now. One effort is a collective effort between charters, the district, around the notion of consolidation, the notion of how many schools need to be in the city, the notion of advocacy, and the conversation around possibly special education services and how collaboration can take place there. On the other end, there are meetings taking place with charters and the district, and quite frankly, other interested parties. As I said before, Opportunity Trust, We Power, Forward to Ferguson, and I could go on. There are other groups at the table, and the city, as we talk about this notion around a citywide planning. And so the hope and belief is that these two efforts can be consolidated in some way, shape, or form. While they are similar in a lot of different ways, and some of the same players are at the table. The belief is over the next 12 months, we will come back with some recommendation if we are able to continue to have these conversations. As you can imagine, these are conversations that are detailed conversations that will take some compromising by all parties to kind of come out with a recommendation. So we see that there is some energy and some effort taking place for the practitioners, those persons who are closest to supporting students in the city, charters, St. Louis Public School, traditional school district, as well as the city of St. Louis, a representative from the mayor's office, as well as other nonprofit partners at the table to have conversations around this notion of a citywide plan. And so I think this concludes my conversation, other than the last piece. And as I had some conversation with the board president, as you can understand, reading is a critical piece for this district. The data indicates that students across the city are not reading on grade level. And so one of the asks from this particular, from the automatic group, as well as the conversation around tips, this notion around how can we engage this community in a real deliberate way around reading and a community commitment around reading. The district has adopted a new reading series, and the district will be reaching out to the community for the community to become an active partner in this effort. What does that mean? That means quarterly updated data to the city, to parents. We also have put together individual reading plans for students. So there's a group that has reached out to us, and we've looked at what they have done, and we've finally finalized ours. But we want to engage this community in a much more detailed commitment around reading, and that may mean a number of different things. We'll be getting back to the community prior to the beginning of the school year, Alderwoman Green, to talk about what we think the role might be for this committee, but what the role might be for other parties in the city as it relates to reading, which is an incredibly important component for our students. And we realize and understand that it is not where it needs to be. And so we see this as a bell ringer for the district and a bell ringer for this community around reading, not just in the St. Louis Public School District, but across the city of St. Louis, a collective effort to do so. So that concludes my conversation. I'll turn it over to Dr. Roberts, who may want to talk about the moratorium, and I'll go back to the resolution that was proffered by by the Board of Education under the leadership at that time of Dr. Rhoda Collins, the board president. Dr. Roberts.
Thank you, Dr. Adams, for that presentation. And I certainly will not take an inordinate amount of time speaking to the moratorium so that you can take questions relative to the PowerPoint. As your Madam Chair indicated, the closing and consolidation did not happen in a vacuum. And as a result, one of the options lifted out of our discussion was coming up with the recommendation for a moratorium. And of course, moratorium means to stop. And what we are asking is to enlist the full support of members of the Aldermanic Board, as well as the community at large, to come together to put together a plan that will be best for all the children that are currently being served in the metropolitan region. And so with that said, St. Louis Public Schools is seeking the support of members of the Aldermanic Committee to agree to introduce a resolution in support of the moratorium. We understand that the power of a moratorium will not make change necessarily on its own, but it will say to the community and to our students that we are in agreement in terms of coming up with a solid plan so that all children in the city of St. Louis can be successful. And so with that said, we're prepared to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts and Dr. Adams, for your time. I'll now open it up to members of the committee for questions. I'll go through seniority here and start with Alderwoman Howard.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Dr. Roberts and Dr. Adams for your presentation. This is really kind of close to home. In understanding how the district is becoming less and the population is diminishing. And I think this is a thing through all school districts. We just don't have the population that we had, due to many social and economic things that have come to pass in our society. But you mentioned a little bit there about the special ed component of in coordinating with that. Could you maybe go into that a little more in depth and what your thoughts are on that?
So as you are aware, Ms. Howard, being a former member of the St. Louis Public School District and a principal, the district provides special education services to approximately 15 to 16% of students in the city of St. Louis, St. Louis Public School students. There is not an additional tax as it is in the county, SSD, that supports that effort. So there's been some conversation. A couple of representatives have reached out to us with the idea of talking about what that might mean for the city of St. Louis in some way to collaborate with SSD, number one, to have them provide services. Obviously, some tax would have to be provided because they wouldn't do it outside of that, or for the district to do that itself. In talking to some of my colleagues in the charter school world, they are possibly interested in that idea, understanding that the needs of special education students are more expensive to provide those services. And so it's only at the infancy stage of a conversation, quite frankly, right now. I do think the collaboration over the next year or 2 years might come back with some recommendation as it relates to that. Quite frankly, a couple of older persons have had some conversations with me about this as well. So it's in a scale of 1 to 10, it's at a 1. It's a conversation. It's nowhere near at a 10. It's nowhere near any place. There are questions that are being asked about it. And so we are pulling the data together, looking at that data, and we'll likely come back over the next year or so with some kind of recommendation, but it's really too early right now to even say that it's in a deep discussion. It's an idea that we are looking at as we examine all of the options for kids in the city of St. Louis, or how we could be more supportive of those students.
And I think that's a wonderful idea. As we know, our needs are great in the city because we have a lot of health issues that impact our poor populations, and being able to streamline those and maybe consolidate them to offer more services because, the budget's tight. And like you said, it is expensive to educate these children and to do a good job with them. So I think that's a wonderful idea going forward. And then one more question, and I know this is sort of going off maybe, have you coordinated with any of the private schools in the area? I had conversations with them also.
So since the pandemic in March of 2020, every single Wednesday at 8 o'clock, there is a conference call with Will Pickney, myself, the health director, and all of the private and charter schools as well, the charter school director, Doug Damon, and the private and parochial schools as well. So we have been in coordination, quite frankly, forced coordination over the last year and a half. We but we know that we have to continue that conversation because their needs are just as especially through this pandemic, it has showed us that all kids need support and services. So yes, there have been the conversations that have taken place over the last year. We will continue those conversations as we talk about how we can work together. And while we have not talked about the special education piece, but we have talked about how we can work together around a number of different areas that were not necessarily in place prior to the pandemic. So if anything positive has come out of this pandemic, it has forced us to work closely together to provide services to kids in the city of St. Louis.
Well, as they say, good happens where you least expect it. So, but that's all I have. But I support the moratorium. And I guess would that also include private and public schools opening? I guess it's kind of hard to restrict that, but.
Yeah, I think this is really focused around public schools, although the moratorium could be expanded beyond that. As Dr. Roberts has indicated, the moratorium doesn't have power, but it does have the ability to get the attention of people to say that this is an important issue that needs to be addressed. We just can't continue, from my vantage point, to close our way to solving this problem. It has to be much more of a unified effort between everybody in the city of St. Louis if we're going to provide services to kids. Because quite frankly, right now, and I'll just give an example. I spend $25 million a year for transportation. Charter spend approximately another 10 million. You're talking $35 million being spent just in the area of transportation, when in some cases buses are passing the same schools and not necessarily dropping kids off, because we're not consolidating, we're not collaborating in any kind of uniform way, just around the operation costs. Forget everything else, just on the operation cost side.
And along with that is the environmental impact of running the buses and so forth, which, you know, I'm aware of, but I don't know how else you get around that, because you do have to get the kids there and you have to provide that transportation. But like coordinating the special ed services, transportation would be another area.
Yes, ma'am.
Coordinate. So,
Yes, ma'am.
well, I appreciate your efforts with this, and I fully support, you know, the moratorium. I hope that we can entice more people to avail themselves to the wonderful services the city public schools provide. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Ingracia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Roberts and Dr. Adams, for being with us this afternoon. Just a handful of hopefully quick questions. I'm really happy to hear that there's collaboration going on between organizations like We Power and Forward Through Ferguson, along with charter and public schools. I think that certain thing, you know, like the Board of Aldermen gets vilified for certain actions, which we should take accountability and responsibility for in the terms of tax incentives. Charter schools get villainized for some reasons either. But I think unless we look at this issue of educating our kids very comprehensively, we're really missing the mark, because there are some things that charter schools are doing well that I think SLPS could learn from, and vice versa. So I'm curious, and this may be part of the planning process that you're already undertaking, but aside from what work we need to do at the board, which I'm happy to take responsibility for and move forward differently, is SLPS looking internally in terms of what can be done fiscally or with innovation, or you know, addressing, aside from the special school district piece, kids that have unique needs that just aren't thriving in traditional school settings, and then the possibility of having especially neighborhood schools provide comprehensive wraparound services to kids and families who need support.
Yes, ma'am, we are. I'll take the last question first. The district has made a commitment next school year. I'll just give you three quick things. Full-time nurse in every single school, full-time counselor in every single school, social work services in every school, not full-time. All of our, at least 50% of our seniors will have jobs next year starting in January at a cost of about 1.6 million. Full-time security, not necessarily be like police officers, but support security in every single one of our schools, elementary, middle, and high school. A laptop and iPad to every single kid next school year, as well as the ability for students who don't have the ability to connect to the internet, providing that services as well. So the district has made a real commitment around looking at the support service side. On the innovation side, yes, the district is looking at ways to be more innovative, whether that's virtual, whether that's looking at other kinds of programs that would support that. The district has two innovative schools right now, Ashland and Merrimack, which are CPN schools that are run like charters with independent boards, separate and apart from the district board. They are a 5-member board. The president serves on that committee, as well as a parent and some other persons as well, and a professor from UMSL serving on that board as well. So the district is trying to be as innovative as possible. I think the pandemic has taught all of us, quite frankly, Alderwoman Gracias, that we have to think differently around supporting kids. And so, yes, the district will be receiving a total of about $181 million, $103 million in ESSA 3, $68 million in ESSA 2, and $10.6 million in ESSA 1 that has already been spent for other kinds of things. And so the district wants to use those dollars in innovative ways to support schools, to give them a lot more autonomy and flexibility, but also from a district perspective, do the same thing. So right now we're in a planning process of learning how to use those dollars in a strategic way to try to be as innovative as possible. Some things have been put in place, but there's still a lot of other things that we're looking to try to do. It is my hope that I'll be making a recommendation to the board in mid-August as the committee that, similar to the committee that the new mayor has put in place. There's a committee that we've put in place as well to look at ways to spend these dollars to try to be innovative.
Thank you so much. Could you go over those pools of funding really quickly? And
Sure.
I understand the acronym.
Sure. The CARES dollars is called ESSER, but it's the CARES dollars that the city has received. We receive educators, schools across the country receive similar kinds of dollars. For the first one, it was called ESSER 1. We received about $10.6 million. Most of those monies were spent on our instructional support centers that we opened, as well as masks, as well as additional transportation that we had to provide to try to make sure that we did the social distancing, in addition to the cost for air filters and those kinds of things. So the first iteration of dollars were already spent. Most of I would say all $10.6 million have gone. We received a second iteration in December for $68 million. A portion of those dollars are being used for support services that I just kind of framed for you. And then the last set of dollars that we have not to receive yet, that we are going to receive, but commitment has been made for $103 million. We are still planning what those dollars will be used for. We anticipate those dollars will be used for tutoring. We anticipate those dollars will be used for some summer school support, because the first iteration of dollars have to be spent in 2 years. The second iteration of dollars have to be spent by 2023. And the third iteration of dollars have to be spent by 2024. So we have a 3-year window to spend these dollars in different iterations. And we are planning right now for how those dollars are going to be used. So it's the same dollars the city received, it's just that they're called something different for school district. And the acronym they use is ESSER, which really is the CARES Act funding.
Okay, thanks again. And last question is, I'm supportive of pausing and requesting that charter schools not open. But I just want to make it clear that since SLPS is a political subdivision of the state and not the city, we don't really control that. We can voice our support. So has anyone been engaging with state officials to ask them to do something similar, since they're the ones who can say yes or no to a charter school opening?
Well, to be honest with you, they can't even, unless there's some legislation that takes place to stop it, because right now, as you indicated, the law already allows that to occur. We have a meeting on Thursday, quite frankly, with some of our local state reps, as well as senators and representatives. I think 8 to 10 will be at a meeting at central office at 9 o'clock on Thursday. This will be part of the conversation with them as well, as they go back to possibly a special session, but definitely in next January. So yes, there have been some conversations that have taken place, and those conversations will be continuing as early as Thursday of this week.
Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Ingracia. I think Alderwoman Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the St. Louis Public School System members. The question I have is pertaining to the moratorium on new schools. Is that St. Louis Public Schools or charter schools? Exactly what does that entail?
Dr. Roberts, you want to address that?
Thank you for that question, Alderwoman Evans. It's pertaining to public schools primarily at this point, and so that would include St. Louis Public Schools as well as charter schools at this stage.
Okay. I'm still not quite clear as to what that moratorium looks like, and how it affects the present St. Louis public schools that we have in existence now. So how am I making myself clear?
Dr. Roberts, you want me to cover it?
Yes, ma'am, you are. St. Louis Public Schools and charters are all public schools. And one of the challenges that we have is that we're sharing students. And in the process of sharing students, we're losing enrollments, and there's consequences that occur when that happens. We're also a school district of choice. And so we send kids all over the city. And so what we're trying to put forth is a plan where everyone can benefit. And what that looks like now, we don't know. We're in the process of crafting a plan that everyone can live and work by.
Another question. I'm trying to understand what the comprehensive citywide plan is for the existing schools that we have. Is there a plan in action now, or is this forthcoming, or what?
Yeah, I'll take that, Dr. Roberts. There isn't a plan right now. There are efforts underway right now with parties to, over the next year, to kind of make a recommendation about what a plan needs to look like. But at this point in time, there are conversations taking place, meetings taking place, and I've indicated some of the parties who are part of those meetings. But at this point in time, there isn't a plan. The idea is that in the next 12 months, hopefully there will be some recommendations that are being made relative to what happens with schools in the city of St. Louis.
Okay. Also, you're saying that this plan is forthcoming. What members are going to be on that board to participate with constructing or developing that plan?
So some of the parties at the table right now are charter school leaders, um, district leaders, nonprofits, the city of St. Louis, the mayor's office. Um, there are some people who have come to the table right now for some initial meetings, and I want to frame, there have only been a couple of meetings. There have not been a million meetings, only 2 meetings to determine who else needs to be at the table, to determine what the process might look like before some recommendation comes. So I think the hope, quite frankly, Alderwoman Evans, is that we have community, we have teachers, principals, the unions, everyone at the table, but there's only been a small nucleus of people at this point in time at the table as we have some initial conversations.
Well, I hope that you include, and the reason I am so vocal about this is because my last 3 remaining public schools were in jeopardy of closing. Well, 2 of them were, 2 of them survived, but my 3rd one, which is Farragut Elementary School, I believe went on the chopping block. So I understand that Sumner survived and Hickey Elementary School survived. And I just want to know, is it a done deal that Farragut is no longer a part of the St. Louis public school system?
Effective at the end of the 2020-21 school year, Farragut is closed. Yes, ma'am.
It's closed. It will be closed.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I had an opportunity to view and go through Farragut School under the principalship of Miss Patricia Cox at that time, and that was at Farragut School. When I went through that school, me being an educator for 34 years, when I went through that building and saw the nature of the program that they had in place And I was just in awe because the program that they had and the grades and scores that they were making, it was a principal's and a teacher's wildest dream, best dream. And so my question is, they had a plan, they had a process, and it was working. The only reason that they were jeopardized to close is because they didn't have the numbers. They made the scores and the grades, and I just couldn't understand why that school was eventually led to close. I'm hoping that the people that you have at the meetings for this comprehensive plan would include the principal at Hickey School, which is Dr. Baird, because he's very, very active with trying to keep the schools open and keep, I guess you could say, the learning process in effect. Are you also, I think you need to include at the table all of the principals of the schools in the city. You know, I know that that may sound unapproachable at this time, but they need to have input so that you will have an idea as to what's going on, what's taking place, and so forth. Are they included on the board?
They will be at this point in time, the school leaders are right now. At this point in time, principals and teachers will be included in the process, in the discussion, or representatives from them will be. There is a principal association as well as a union, teachers union, and so they will have representation at the table. Yes, ma'am. It may not be, to your point, all 60 at the table, but they will have representation.
Okay, and as far as the comprehensive plan, you're saying that should take effect, or you should have a comprehensive plan as soon as when?
There is a conversation taking place that this will likely be a 12 to 18-month process. This is going to take some time to have all of the persons at the table for this kind of conversation. Nothing is done right now. That we are still in the process of, as you can imagine, as an alderwoman, it takes some time to get people moving in that direction. And the pandemic has obviously caused us not to have those kind of face-to-face meetings and to move slowly in this process. But I would think anywhere from 12 months to a year, Alderwoman Evans, is the time frame that we're looking at.
So 12 months to 18 months is the timeline for the comprehensive plan.
For a recommendation, some
For
recommendations.
a recommendation.
Yes, ma'am.
So in the meantime, what does our present school look like? Children going to school this upcoming school year, is it still remote and virtual? Are there some on-site, or what does that look like?
All school districts have to present their plans to the state on tomorrow. Our plan will indicate that all students at this point in time will be 100% in person. That is what the recommendation is for the St. Louis Public School District for next school year, based upon the present rate of transmission of the virus and the fact that we believe that we have over 80% of our staff vaccinated, and we will be working aggressively to do the same for students. We feel at this point in time that if there's no uptick in transmission, that we can be 100% in person next school year. Right now, we are 100% in person for summer school with about 4,200 students. This is the model that we're following to see how things work out. We're still doing contact tracing. We'll still have to do some quarantining, but at this point in time, we feel comfortable today. If everything stays the same or gets better, that we will be 100% in person next school year.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adams.
Thank you.
I just want to state that I am a product of St. Louis public school system. And even though that was some years ago, I won't go into detail how many, Dr. Robertson, don't ask me, okay? But yes, I can remember going through the St. Louis public school systems, and the teachers that we had were phenomenal, very phenomenal. And I just hope that we can get back to that, I guess you could say, I'm at a loss for words right now. I owe it to my age, and sometimes the words are there and sometimes they're not. But I just hope that the type of education that I received years ago is what's being implemented now. And there were, like I said, there were some excellent teachers that came out, that became principals, that became administrators. And I just look forward to that process being instilled again.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Alderwoman. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Evans. Alderwoman Schweitzer?
Thank you so much, Chairwoman, and thank you, Dr. Roberts and Dr. Adams, for presenting to us today. Yeah, I'm really interested in the citywide plan that you all are putting together between charter and district schools. One of the things that I think comes up a lot is the oversight of charter schools, that there isn't, the elected school board isn't overseeing the charter schools. Do you anticipate discussing that oversight in the citywide plan?
It is not something that we initially, there are laws as relates to that are at the state level. So that is not one of the things that has come up as something for us to look at. It's kind of bifurcated. There's a commission that can authorize some schools, and then there are sponsors in the city of St. Louis, like universities that could do that does some of that as well. So it's unfortunately incredibly complicated and legalistic as it relates to, but that is not something that we are talking about at this point in time.
Okay, so if there are a lot of complications, which obviously it sounds like there are with that, perhaps there's some sort of standards that can be sort of uniformly adopted in that citywide plan to at least have some sort of promise of specific things being met. But I look forward to hearing all about that and participating in whatever way that you all ask us to. You mentioned about the transportation and special school district conversations and collaboration. Sort of off the top of your head, is there anything else that's come up regularly that is being discussed as a place to collaborate?
A food service is one of the other things that has come up. The other piece is a building usage, the notion of buildings, and also one of the things, quite frankly, a little bit surprising to me, but should not be, is this notion of how can we all work collectively together to focus on the most at-risk students. Whether you're in a charter school or a traditional public school, all of us deal with students who have real severe challenges. And so how can we collectively work to support those students, whether they're in a traditional public school or a charter school? In other words, can there be some uniform effort that we all contribute to try to address the neediest kids who have those kind of unique challenges? Quite frankly, it's hard for us to educate some kids, and it's hard for charter schools to educate some kids. So how can we collectively work together to make sure that kids are not slipping through the cracks who have the greatest need? So that is one of the other things that has come up just a little bit.
In that same way, with students moving from school to school, I heard some statistic a few years ago about the just enormity of how many students move between schools within the school year. Are you still seeing that that is a large percentage of students? And what kind of communication happens between schools when a kid does move?
So that's a really excellent observation. That is still an issue for, I think, us, and that's why we are at the table, because we do think it's about 25% of our population is considered homeless, which means that they are moving from one place to another. And when they do that, they sometimes move schools as well to try to get closer to a school that's not necessarily in the initial place that they started. We are still seeing that. We still see that as being a major problem. And we do see kids going back and forth, quite frankly. The traditional way that we're communicating is the kid has to give us information, then we have to request information from the school that the kid was coming from. So one of the things that might be on the table, quite frankly, Alderwoman, is some process, that some clearinghouse, if you will, such that that information can clearly be provided to the new school that the kid is going to. We, as Dr. Roberts said, we are a choice districts. We have magnet schools, we have choice schools, we have neighborhood schools, we have charter schools, and quite frankly, we have about 4,000 African-American kids every day who get on buses and go to the county as part of the VIC program. So you add all of those things together and it's incredibly complicated. And so there needs to be possibly some clearinghouse for information for kids, such that it's not taking a school a month to find out where that kid was academically to provide those services. So that is not something that we've talked about. That is something that I suspect will be on the table for us to talk about. It just has not come to the table right now. The big piece has been this notion around SSD and this notion around a moratorium in a number of schools. But I would suspect, based on your observation, the observation of the practitioners who are touching kids every single day, that we will have to look at that as well.
Thank you. That's a good answer. It sounds like a lot of money coming in from the federal government through CARES. That's excellent news. Did charter schools also?
Yes, they did.
Thank you. And for the schools that were closed, one of the things that came up a lot is, whether or not people who worked at the schools or teachers or whatever were going to be moved to other schools. Were you able to retain most of those jobs?
So there have been zero layoffs. We've not laid off anyone. 2 of the school buildings have offers on them today, which means that people are buying them. 2 of the other buildings are looked to be used by the district. And one is a PD center. One is going to be used as a PD center. We have 2 partners right now, university partners, who are working with us to occupy one of the buildings such that they can keep social work services and that kind of stuff in that community. So at this point in time, all of the schools are likely going to be used in another fashion, whether that's through sale, whether that's through a partnership. But at this point in time, it looks like all 7 of the buildings are going to be used in some way, shape, or form.
That's great. So regarding you mentioned 68 million has to be spent by 2023 and 100+ million for 2024. What do you anticipate the majority of that expenditure is going towards?
So we did a survey for the community, and over 3,000 persons responded. 70% of them indicated that the money should be used for learning loss, supporting kids who have lost the opportunity to be educated for the pandemic. 30% would be used based upon the feedback for facilities. That means repairing stuff that needs to be repaired, as well as the air quality, the water quality, those kinds of things. I suspect that those are the 2 areas that we're going to be focused on. When you say learning loss, there's a lot of things that come under that. And that's why the Restart Committee, the committee that we have, as a matter of fact, the first meeting will be Monday, made up of parents, principals, teachers, will be coming to the table to kind of ferret out what that means. So I don't want to show my hand, if you will, because I want the committee to be the ones that say what happens. If I go in already pre-assuming some things, then people will say that's my agenda, and I want it to be their agenda about how these dollars will be used. So We've already got feedback from the community. They spoke, large that they want the money to be used to support kids. So I would suspect 70% of those dollars are going to be used to support kids, and then some dollars to use to fix buildings or to repair buildings or touch buildings. I just don't know the details of it right now. How much might go to elementary school? How much might go to middle school? Is it a program? Is it tutoring? I want them to give me feedback regarding that.
Great. So the amount you mentioned that the school district didn't receive since 2008, I believe it was $126 million. Of course, with this CARES money coming in, what's coming in is more than that amount that has been lost. However, I imagine your argument to that would be the school district was further set back than it would have been had it had that 126 million. Can you talk a little bit about, when we're communicating about to our colleagues or to residents or developers about, what the difference would be between the district we see today and the district we would see if that 126 million would have gone to SLPS?
Wow, that is an excellent question. I would suspect that we would not have closed 47 schools over the last few years. That's number one. I would suspect that, as you likely know, the buildings in St. Louis are really old and challenged. And while I think the ITNA buildings are great buildings, the bones of those buildings are just really magnificent. They're old and they take constant upkeep. I would have suspected that we would have built one or two schools. I would have suspected that we would have had better quality fields and athletic venues for our kids. I would suspect that instead of us getting in a pandemic to provide the kind of technology support that we're providing, we would have done that 10 years ago. I would suspect those will be some of the kinds of things that would have been done if the $125 million were there. When I arrived here in 2008, we had to balance the budget because we had a $66 million deficit that had to be addressed. As a result of that, I did layoffs, I did school closings, I did a number of things to try to rectify the fiscal problems that the district had. So I would suspect, Madam Alderwoman, that some of the kinds of deteriorations that you've seen in the district would not have taken place if those dollars were consistent and constant, and we would not be at that place now. The $125 million are the monies that I'm talking about, not 181, are really just to address learning loss issues. Kids have been out of school. We have more kids failing this year than we've had in several years. Why? To be totally transparent with you, there were about 10% of kids we couldn't even find for a long period of time. We just could not locate kids. And so we had to have knock on doors, drive-bys. So, when you talk about 20,000 kids, there are about easily 1,000 to 1,500 kids that we have a lot of difficulty finding. Many of our kids got jobs at the high school level because they had to support families that were not working. And as a result of that, they were not online on a regular basis. They were not. They were just not online. And then you deal with the social emotional challenges that our kids deal with on a regular basis. And that's why we're looking at full-time social workers and nurses. So I can easily make a case that the dollars that are being used to support the tax incremental financings or TIFs, if you will, could have easily been used to support kids. And another issue that I think is incredibly important to mention here. Since I've been superintendent, Alderwoman, we have lost over 176 kids by death. Over 176 kids. Some of those dollars could have been used for alternative programs to support kids who are most at risk. So I think it's, for me, a very easy case to make that those dollars could have been and should have been used to support kids in the public arena. And I'm not against TIFs at all in any way, shape, or form. I think in some countries, in some cities across the country, there's been an agreement that has been done that it's not 10 years, that they're 5 years, or that school districts are held harmless, that other entities might not be. So I think there's a way to solve this problem or address this. I just don't know that 100% TIFs is the way for that to occur. But I hope that answered your question. I'm sorry I took a little bit longer to do so.
I appreciate it. Some of the things you said, about the building upkeep and the field and athletic updates are some of the things I hear when people I know with kids move out to the county because they like those amenities. And obviously we could have had them had things been different. One of the things, the last question I had sort of comes back to that point. When either ourselves or people we know or our constituents are looking at sending their children to public schools, and we want to help guide them to make that choice, what is sort of the entry point for potential parents? And can you just give me, 1 minute on what I would say to somebody who is considering choosing public schools?
So what I would say is that the district offers a lot of different choices, for magnet choices, gifted choices, pre-K, over 2,000 kids who are in our pre-K programs. And the district is very supportive of finding the right environment for a kid. I think we do a really poor job of framing that to our parents and our community. But what I would say to them is that the district has a number of different choices available, whether they're neighborhood schools like a strong school like Man or Buder, or magnet programs gifted like Kennard or Mellencrot, or high schools, some of the best high schools in the state, or CSMB, Metro, McKinley, Central VPA, obviously Cleveland just closed, Carnahan. So I think there's some great opportunities there. What I would say to parents is you have to do your homework because you have to try to match the school with your child's needs. And every child has a different need. I think we do have some challenges, quite frankly, Alderwoman, with some of our neighborhood schools. Those are the schools that are in areas that are high poverty areas, and that makes it very difficult for families to make some choices in those arenas. But even in those schools, they are great schools, and we could help you by, by calling my office or the magnet school office to try to assist you. We have 4 recruiters right now. Now that's all they do. They try to assist families to get into the right schools, and we have a recruitment office with 4 people to help do that. And Navigate STL is a group that we've been working with to try to do a better job of publicizing what we do offer and the options that might be available. So that's what I would say. Examine all of the choices with the 60 choices that we have and challenge us when we're not offering something that a particular family needs to have, and we will do our best to try to accommodate that need.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I'm actually going into Warner School tomorrow and meeting with people there and looking forward to getting a tour.
Yes.
I really appreciate all the time that you all have taken to explain this to us. I know the people on this board and this committee in particular care very deeply about our public schools, and know we're here for you as well. Thank you for your time. I'm done with my questions.
Thank you. Warner is a great school with all boys classes and all girls classrooms, so that's a great choice.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman Stevens?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Adams and Dr. for being here today. I do want to just sort of preemptively say that I want to thank you and also acknowledge all the many sleepless nights that I'm sure you've had, Dr. Adams, Dr. Roberts, and I believe Dr. Rhode Collins is here with us too. I want to acknowledge and extend my appreciation for the emotional toll that this takes on us as individuals. It very much is a labor of love, and it is absolutely a worthy cause because our children will always be a worthy cause. But I just want to call out the fact that there are definitely sleepless nights. There are definitely those days where you just want to punch a wall. And I recognize that. And I believe I stand with the rest of the committee in doing so. I also want to say that I do support a moratorium. I was wondering if you had any idea of the sort of duration, if it was like, if you wanted a specific, maybe like a 12-month moratorium, or if it was more so until certain criteria or a certain climate had been met. And if you don't want to speak to that, please do not feel compelled. I support the moratorium either way.
I'll let Dr. Roberts speak to that because it was the board's moratorium that I 100% support, but I think the board is the one who would be best to speak to that.
Mr. Stevens, thank you for that question. It is a process We haven't established the exact benchmarks yet. We're framing it out, and that's why it's important that everyone is at the table. So at this time, we're framing it out. There's no hard, fast deadline,
Okay, excellent.
other than the year that Dr. Adams spoke to.
Okay, thank you. And and I mean, I could speak ad nauseum on my opposition to TIFs, which I believe are, while there are certain cases, there will always be certain cases where TIFs are applicable. I do think that we hand them out far too often. And I think that is to the detriment not only of our public schools, but to our children. Again, we have to keep our children in the center of the conversation. Dr. Adams, earlier in your presentation, you spoke of, or let me stay in my notes here, how we can engage the public in a way supporting reading and literacy. Prior to my election, I was the senior most member of the early childhood outreach team at St. Louis Public Library. So I want to here and now offer my full support and any assistance on that endeavor that I can offer, be it connecting you to various organizations that support early childhood literacy, such as St. Louis Public Library, Ready Readers, so on and so forth, or if I can be of more use, being more hands-on. But I do absolutely believe that needs to be a priority, not just in St. Louis, but across the country. We're seeing trends downward in that area. And I applaud the recognition and the cognizance on that front. And I do think overall, because this isn't just a TIF issue here in St. Louis, you know, it isn't just an issue with our schools. I mean, you said approximately 25% of your student population is unhoused or struggling with stable housing, that there have been 176 student deaths. This isn't just, you know, it's not just funding, it's systemic. It's an entire culture. It's an entire approach that the city has taken and its people have taken. And as I acknowledge the sleepless nights, I also want to acknowledge the sort of Sisyphean task, the sense that we're trying to roll a boulder up a hill or push water up a hill, and that it has to be comprehensive. So I'm very interested in the development of this citywide group, the citywide recommendation, the citywide study that you'll be conducting. I have full faith that it will look at all these different areas, but I think we need to reiterate that, and it has to be said, because when we make assumptions, you know, that's when things fall through the cracks. So I appreciate the alacrity that not only you, Dr. Adams, with St. Louis Public Schools, and you, Dr. Roberts, with the Board of Education are taking, but the engagement from the community, the fierce support that we've seen from the community, and the alacrity in which you're addressing what is a citywide and a sort of comprehensive issue that, you know, that cannot, it would be reductive to only boil it down to, you know, this problem or this problem, when it's really just a whole web of problems. And I am here for at least 2 years to help untangle that web. You have my full support. The moratorium rather has my full support. And please, my inbox is open. My phone is always on. You know, I am of my generation. So with that said, with that declaration of full support, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Owens.
Thank you. Alderman Page?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also thank you, Doctors Roberts and Adams, for joining us today. From what I understand so far, I am in full support of the moratorium against opening additional new schools until a comprehensive plan can be put in place. The two questions that I have, and I'll be brief in the interest of time, are related, but they're a little different. One of the things, and by the way, I do visit schools within and nearby my ward. I recently had a wonderful time visiting with Dr. Rogers and her students at Patrick Henry Downtown Academy on Police Day, coincidentally. It was a great experience for the entire staff, myself, and the kids, I might add. I've also done extensive work with charter schools in the area, including the downtown Confluence Academy and the Arch Community School over in Salisbury. So I kind of try to spread it around. My questions are related to all of this, but a little bit different. I vividly remember just a few years ago when members of a nonprofit that I've been involved with for quite some time, and I got with the then principal and put on a program at Cote Brillant Elementary School the week before it closed. Our goal was to encourage not only the students, also the parents, and also the staff as the school was prepping for closure to stay strong, to continue their focus on their education, and throughout all of these changes. My question to you is, and I realize that taking a look at school population statistics, the populations are declining. So I think some school closures are just unavoidable. But my question to both of you leaders of St. Louis Public Schools is, what does the school system do to support the kids through being thrown to the winds? Over at Cote Brillant, for instance, I'm sure you remember that a lot of the elementary school students, their parents used to walk them to school and drive them to school on the way to work. All of that went away when that school closed. Now, I realize some of our schools are not in good physical condition, but Cote Brillant, in my opinion, was a dramatic exception. It was a great physical plant. All of that brickwork had recently been tuck pointed. The hardwood floors inside were just brilliantly finished. And so I kind of hated to see it close, but I accept the reality. What does St. Louis Public Schools do to support, especially kids, when they're undergoing school closure and being scattered to the winds, to give them the best chance of academically surviving these transitions?
I think that's an excellent question. I think we've done a better job over the last iteration of school closures to do this. At this point in time, and I'll just use this as an example, we have a recruitment team, as I indicated before to one of the other older persons, and about 87% of the kids that that are in schools right now, of the 7 schools, have been placed in other schools. About 13% have not been, with about 3 or 4% us still being able to find, understanding that we were virtual all year last year, and some have moved out of the city. About 3% are going to charters, and about 5% are leaving the city of St. Louis. And so what we do is we have a recruitment team that works with families to get them in the right place, to get them the uniforms they need, to take care of transportation issues. So we have a team that's doing that right now with the 7 schools. Possibly, Mr. Page, in the past, we did not do such a good job of that. We tried our best to do so, but now we have been a little bit more strategic around doing that. Honestly, technology has made it easier for us to do that, because when we started the pandemic, we had about 37% of our families, 35% of our families that had emails and had an ability to text them. Right now, that number is about 80 to 90%. So because of the pandemic, families have been forced to communicate with us differently, in a different kind of way. And so as a result of that, we've been able to communicate with them to support them as they go through this transition. So long and short, number one, we've been smarter. And as a result of that, we've been able to get better communication with families. Number two, we've been able to follow and support those families to get in places that they want to be in. And if you're going to a place you want to be, you will be motivated to communicate with us to get where you need to get. So those are the 3 things that we've been able to do differently than what we did with Cote Brillant. When we closed Cote Brillant, I think that was in 2015 or 16, when we closed Cote Brillant about 4 years ago. And it was a different kind of communication then. We tried to move those families to Hickey, which was a closed school, the closest school, which was Hickey, but we were not as successful as we wanted to be in terms of that piece. So I hope that answers part of your question.
Well, it does, but I still retain significant concern about the emotional impact of closure and dispersal of students from closed schools. I think the emotional impact is very important in a kid's academic life. So that part of my question remains. In the interest of time, let's jump right into my second question. And that is, I appreciate your mentioning of tax incentives tied to development. And I am one who believes that the Board of Aldermen and all city government should be very strategic in their allocation of tax abatements and tax increment financing. So my question to you is, what wisdom would you share with this committee and by extension with the St. Louis Board of Aldermen regarding allocation of tax incentives, given, as you said, a lot of developers will not, or at least they allege they will not, develop without said tax incentives. What wisdom would you share with us?
I'll defer to my board president first. I think she's a little bit more astute of this than I am, but I'll let her go first and then I'll follow up. Dr. Roberts.
Thank you. I would just encourage everyone making a decision around TIFs to be mindful of its impact on schools and perhaps come up with some meaningful way that everybody wins. And by that, I mean that schools don't have to wait 10 years to get a portion of the TIF or wait to the end of the life of the TIF to realize some resources. There could be some consideration given to, for example, building materials are not being taxed. And so I think as adults, we can be creative and come up with a plan whereby schools are not at the end of the list, but at the top of the list. And so that's calling on the creativity of our Board of Aldermen and also the TIF committee. We are limited in our representation on the TIF committee. I've had an opportunity to chat with the chair and to sit in on those meetings, and they're not very kind to schools. And so I'm going to lean into your expertise as you give approval to those TIFs. Just keep the kids at the forefront.
And the only other thing I would add, Alderman, is the fact that the district realizes and understands, I think not for the first time, but that there needs to be some representation at City Hall. And so right now the board is advertising two things. Number one, for a lobbyist, and also for a contract for lobbyists. And so we're looking at it both ways. If we can hire somebody to do this, or if we can contract with some entity to be a part of what happens in central office, not central office, what happens at City Hall, to kind of communicate with you what the needs and ideas of the board is. It's incredibly important. So there is a RFP out right now. It was put out last Friday. I can't think of the exact title. It's called Municipal Liaison, some title like that. And then there's the lobbyist position is one position, but we're looking at it from two different angles. As an employee of the district temporarily, or as a contract employee is a secondary way. Quite frankly, to be the communication piece from you to developers, to the board, to try to make sure that the district's interest is front and center before you and before developers and before the board as well, as it relates to TIFs and those kinds of things.
Thank you, Drs. Roberts and Adams. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. I know that there's some non-committee members here, and I believe that Alderwoman Boyd had some questions.
Can you hear me?
You have a bit of an echo, but
Hold on. Now, can you hear me?
much better.
Whew. This computer's driving me crazy. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you allowing me to speak. But the question that I'm having, one, with the Board of Education under the realm of the state, why are we doing a momentarium or whatever that thing you call it? Why are we doing that? Why isn't it going through the state?
As I said earlier, I think the board is looking at two avenues, and Dr. Roberts can speak to it locally. Right? While it may not have power, it does have influence. And then, as I said before, the board is meeting with representatives from the state on Thursday, and I suspect that this will be one of the topics that they will address with the local representatives and senators who will be coming to the table. So they're looking at it in two ways, one local and one statewide. And Dr. Roberts can speak to that other piece.
Thank you for that question. It's a rallying point for all of us, but just the district, the city, the families. It's a call to action for all of us to put all of the strategies front and center that will support all kids in the district. It's not a law, but it is a rallying point for all of us to come together and bring our energy and talents and focus around what will create a healthy learning climate for all kids.
Okay, and then my other question is in regards to the, the CECs. I know we were down to 8 CECs, and so to my surprise, I found out that you all lost funding for those CECs. And so, as a board of aldermen and I guess your community outreach people with the Board of Education, what is being done to address those dollars that were pulled? Because with the way the crime is going in our communities, those CECs played a critical piece in our communities because they helped reduce a lot of the crime because they had activities for our youth and families to do. And some of those CECs were open till like 9 o'clock at night. So that kind of gave us leverage to help deter the crime and gave those young adults and youth something to get them off the street. So is anything being looked at in regards to that?
So at this point in time, we have 4 CEC centers open, and the district covers that cost 100%. Several years ago, the city provided about 50% of that funding, or maybe even a little bit more. But since I want to say 2015 or 16, that the city provides $0. Other than dollars, I think through the safety committee, there were some dollars that were coming from that committee. We had to write for a special grant to get it. It cost us about $125,000 a year to keep a CEC center open. That's the salary plus all of the ancillary supports that happen. So that's about $500,000. There are some discussions. I've had several conversations with Mr. Cummings, who is with AFT, about their initiative to push to try to find funding to do so. One of my biggest concerns, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, is that this should not just be the district's responsibility. This should be a community's responsibility to make this happen if we think it's a critical component. As I said, for the last 4 years, at schools like Vashon, Walbridge, Oak Hill, we have kept those centers open. At our cost in Yateman, those are the 4 centers that are open right now. When I arrived there, it was something like 15, but the dollars have gone. And so we are committed to what we spend now for those, and we will likely continue in that venue. But it would be helpful if we want to expand the numbers, Ms. Boyd, that there's some other dollars that will come alongside the district dollars to make this possible, especially in light of where we are with ESSER funding. But as you know, that's only a 3-year window of time for funding. We don't want to spend anything that's going to go away 3 years from now or 2 years from now. That would be a one-time, it would not be a one-time cost, it would be a continuing cost. So I think it's a great idea, a great point. I think it's something at least another board member, at least a couple of board members, SLPS board members have asked me about. And I would think that is something that we might be entertaining, but there will have to be some dollars coming alongside that, alongside us to make that happen in more sites.
And I understand that. I guess my concern is because we do not I guess what my concern is, it's not public knowledge about the CEC buildings because one time CECs, that was like your community center. That's where, because we had community centers that were shut down. And so the CEC stepped up to that and played the role. So I guess what I'm looking for is how can we come together as the Board of Aldermen like we did in the past and to support those CECs because people keep trying to recreate things and all these new ideas, and we really have things in place. We just need to get them financed and get them where the community is being serviced. And that's what I don't see happening. The community is not being serviced. And so you have buildings that are sitting up and nobody's utilizing them. And so that's how we wind up in the situation we're in. So that's why I was asking those questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Alderwoman. We do have a couple other non-committee members here that did not specifically let me know that they have questions, but if Alderwoman Rice or Alderman Collins Mohammed have questions, if you would let me know, I'm happy to let you ask questions before we move on. Okay. Seeing none from either, I have just a couple of quick questions, I think. One, a follow-up question on just Alderwoman Boyd's point. Do you have a cost on, or maybe a per building cost on community education centers and what it would cost to stand up more of those?
$125,000 a site.
Okay.
So you figure that would be the cost. That's for one staff person and the services that they provide. So it's about 125,000 with benefits and costs and that kind of stuff. So it's about $125,000.
Okay. And how many, ideally, how many more would you like to stand up?
I would think if we want to do this right and do it well, no more than 4 more right now. I think every school, every community does not need one or want one. And I think we would have to be strategic in terms of where they go, find the right person. This is not something that's going to happen in August, even if we had the money. It has to be well planned, coordinated really well. It's something I can see happening maybe mid-year if there was some dollars coming, or even next school year. But I would say double the numbers from 4 to 8.
Okay. Sounds good. Other question I had is in terms of the citywide plan, is early childhood being considered in that? Or are early childhood providers or preschool organizations at the table in the development of that plan?
At this point in time, no, but I think that's an excellent point. We have not had ECE at the table, but I suspect in light of this question that we do need to make sure that they are included since they play an integral part. We were looking at pre-K through 12 is the focus of what we're looking at. We were not looking at 0 to 3, obviously because they are not public entities. Many of those are private entities, but I do think it's worth putting on the table for the group to kind of discuss. So I'll take that. I'll take that recommendation back to the team and see how we nuance that.
Okay, great. Next, just so you know, next week, the committee will be meeting again to hear from the St. Louis Federal Reserve. Just released a report
Yeah, I saw that.
on early childhood and child care capacity that was pretty concerning for St. Louis. And so
I saw that. It was my intent to participate, just to listen, and I did see that on the website, the city's website.
Okay. Second question I had is just what do you see as sort of the role of the board of aldermen in the citywide plan? You know, we also kind of exist downstream from decisions that the district makes, right? You know, you exist downstream from decisions we make in terms of, you know, when we make decisions with TIFs and tax abatements, that can have implications on the district. And then when school closures happen, it's often, you know, those of us who represent communities where those buildings can sit vacant, who then have to deal with the long-term repercussions of vacant buildings. and the impact that has on communities. So what role do you see for the Board of Aldermen in this plan, and also what role do you see in kind of determining how to use some of the already closed St. Louis public school buildings in part of that plan?
So I think the second one is a little bit harder. The first one is easy. It is my belief and hope and recommendation that this committee, which is the Education Committee, Educating and Youth Committee, would have representatives. And so once we get to the point of saying whosoever will email to you asking that you would have 2 or 3 committee persons be at the table and be involved in these meetings over the next year. I think that's easy. Number one, that you need to be at the table, just like there's a mayoral representative at the table at this time, Mr. Pinckney. So I would think that's number one. Number two, I think the use of as the committee likely knows, real estate is really hot right now in the city of St. Louis and across the country. And so we've had more interest in our buildings than we've had in my 12 years that I've been here as superintendent. And so I would think that any kind of effort from the automatic level, if meaning that if there are buildings that are vacant in your wards that are not necessarily have moved in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, for us to try to set up some meeting with Mr. Walker, who's our real estate person, to see how we can engage with you to assist us in finding someone that might could occupy, use that building. As I said before, we want to be aggressive about keeping buildings alive. And I'll just use 2 examples. Dunbar and Clay are 2 schools that are closing. We all know that those 2 buildings are close to NGA. It is likely in 3 to 5 years that those buildings might have to be put back into use again, depending upon what happens in those neighborhoods. We would like to keep a presence in those buildings short term for the next 2 or 3 years, that somebody's going in the building every day, that we're paying electricity and gas, that some entity might be partnering with us to use that building, because it may be a time 3 or 4 years from now, past my time as superintendent, it may be past some of your times as older persons, that those schools will reopen again as neighborhoods come back and flourish. So I would love to have any older person who has a building that is not being occupied right now, meaning that it's not sold and it's not in terrible condition, and most of them are, quite frankly, to work with us around the possibility of trying to leverage someone using those buildings in some way, shape, or form, or assisting us to get the buildings moved in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for your time today. I don't want to keep you. You're welcome to stay on the committee meeting if you would like to, as we do have a couple of other folks who have asked to address the committee today, on this topic, but don't feel like you have to stay if you have other, business that you need to get to. But definitely thank you for your time today. It's very, very, very much appreciated. And I think, I hope and I think that this is the first of many conversations to come in, building some greater collaborative relationships between SLPS and city government and the Board of Aldermen, to make sure that we really are having an open dialogue and open conversation about in some shared decision making, so that we can create a city that really does work for our kids. So thank you for taking all the questions today and for sharing such a wealth of information with us. It's really appreciated.
Well, thank you very much, Alderwoman Green, and to the older persons and all the other persons on the screen as well. I just want to say thank you very much. As you indicated, look really forward to working collaboratively together. This is a breath of fresh air for me, quite frankly, to even have this kind of conversation. Again, we're not going to always agree about everything, but I think the dialogue is important as we try to move this city forward and doing what's best for kids, because that's the center of what our work is about. So I want to say thank you. I will probably listen in. I do have a board meeting myself tonight that I'm preparing for, and so I will likely listen to the other parts of the committee, but I'll likely go dark and you want to see me, but I'll still have the audio on so I can hear as I move around and get some work done prior to the meeting. So Dr. Roberts.
I'd like to thank everyone too for this invitation, and definitely this is a collaboration that should continue well past my time. But I'd like to end with thank you guys for your support, Mr. Stevens for taking the leadership in the area of reading, Want all of the alder persons to lift that up in your meeting with your community members, along with the support of the moratorium. And you're coming up with some strategies that we can all benefit when it comes to TIFs. And Mr. Page, to your question, if if we as adults change our behavior, we can lift up our kids as they transition from their closed schools to their new schools. There are plenty of activities that we can make that an exciting adventure instead of something to feel bad about. So again, thank you for your time and attention, and look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. So as we go on to the next few folks who have asked to address the committee today, I wanted to start with Dorothy Rohde Collins, the past president of the St. Louis School Board.
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Green and members of the committee. My name is Dorothy Rohde Collins, and I'm a resident of the 8th Ward, a current SLPS parent, and a doctoral student in education policy at SLU. Thank you for calling this meeting and inviting the school district to present about recent progress and struggles. For too long, our education system has been left out of citywide planning conversations and policy decisions. Despite the fact that every day our public education system reaches 30,000 children, it is still an afterthought when it should be our city's #1 priority. The work of this committee is absolutely critical to the health and longevity of our city and its schools. It is imperative that this committee support the Board of Education's 3 calls to action. Without these changes, both SLPS and charter schools will continue to close. Students have become a commodity as all public schools struggle for enrollment. Even the recently approved charters, which claim to be opening due to parental demand, are not meeting their enrollment goals. Just as students move between district and charter schools, so too do the teachers. We do not have a system which draws in new students and teachers, and instead, schools poach from each other in an effort to stay open. As the city's policymakers, it is your responsibility to take the big picture view of the system and contribute your energy towards supporting a system of excellent schools that operates in accordance with the values of the people it serves. And one of these values is the importance of keeping our existing schools open. In January, students, parents, alumni, educators, developers, philanthropists, executives, and taxpayers came out from every corner of this city in near perfect unison to resist the permanent school closures proposed by the district. The people of St. Louis value keeping our existing schools open. We cannot do that without a citywide plan for education, and we cannot make a plan when the system is constantly changing through new school openings and old schools closing. Although SLPS receives the bulk of the attention for closing schools, 15 charter schools have also closed, dispersing thousands of students back into the education system and leaving even more buildings empty. If keeping schools open is a value this city holds close, and I believe it is, then we have to move away from the idea of school closure as a method of accountability and reinvest in the schools that we currently have. I know others will tell you that the way to improve education is to open new schools, to buy specific curriculum, or to partner with chosen organizations. But the truth is we've been trying that for the past 20 years in this city, and the only thing it's gotten us is a deeply fragmented education landscape that exacerbates all of our underlying disparities. Our city segregation based on race and economics is not limited to the neighborhoods. It is duplicated in our city's school system, where some students in schools are labeled winners and others are labeled losers. And once we recognize this, we have the moral responsibility and the obligation to reverse it. This city did not have a plan for education 20 years ago when charters first opened, and the lack of a plan then means fragmentation now. The board members and administrators in SLPS and the charter sector cannot be blamed for making decisions in their students' best interest. It is their legal, moral, and ethical responsibility to do exactly that. But we also have to monitor the system as a whole to ensure that St. Louis has quality public school options in every single ward, and that every single child has the equal opportunity to pursue a life of dignity, health, and happiness. And while it's true that the only body which can enforce the moratorium on new school openings in St. Louis is the Missouri legislature, we cannot expect them to act in support of us if we don't clearly communicate what we value. We cannot wait on them to decide they want to impose a moratorium on us. We have to choose to do the right thing, pause new schools until a citywide plan for education is developed. And there is no doubt that that plan development will be challenging, but the world-class public education system it produces will absolutely be worth the effort. It is time for the Board of Aldermen to publicly commit to supporting the Board of Education in their 3 asks and to assist in convening those individuals who have the knowledge, expertise, and willpower to make a cohesive system of schools a reality. Thank you again for holding this meeting, and I hope to work with you as we move forward on these matters.
Thank you, Dorothy. Next up is Christina Zabrowski.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and hello, fellow committee members. My name is Christina Zabrowski. I'm a resident in St. Louis City's 8th Ward. I am a proud SLPS parent, and I have 2 children who attend Mason School for Academic Cultural Literacy, Magnolia, who is a rising 3rd grader, and Oliver, who will be starting kindergarten in the fall. I come to speak with you today to share a piece of my story, that of my children, and an ask of what you can do to make the educational experiences of students in St. Louis brighter, better, and beneficial for the entire community. My educational roots began in Louisville, Kentucky, where I was a student within the Jefferson County Public School District. My mother, who is my sole caregiver, used the resources she had to ensure I received a quality education. One drastic measure she took was for us to take up residence in my great-grandmother's home, so I could have an address within a zip code of a high-performing elementary school. It was pressed upon me that I had no choice but to do well, because if I didn't, my mother would remove me from this school and send me to my neighborhood school. As a 7-year-old, that left a mark because I knew of the students who attended the school and I did not want to go. 33 years later in a different city, and I find much of the worry from my childhood is alive and unfortunately thriving among St. Louis families. Still, families are faced with the same issues, trying to find access to quality public education near their homes. I mention this because the SLPS district is in dire need of better, comprehensive support from you, the Aldermanic Board, and the leaders of this city. I am here today to make a plea to you to do more and to do better. To start, I ask each of you to commit to actively engaging the school administration and parents who have children in your SLPS neighborhood schools. Start by sending an introduction email or picking up the phone and scheduling an opportunity to tour the schools. And I'm so thankful to hear that many of you have taken this charge personally already, but more of you need to do more. I'm asking you to engage with the school principals, asking them to learn and to listen and to share their stories with you so you understand what that experience is like, both the good and the gritty. I promise you, they will receive your offer warmly and enthusiastically. Make the charge to other aldermen to do the same and to hold each other accountable. Then collectively, you will gain exposure to the school leaders and your most important constituents, which are the children of our city. You will build the much needed communicative pipeline, enabling you to learn directly how your decisions here make a direct impact on the success of students who walk the school halls and walk the streets of your neighborhoods. It is time for you to take a stand for SLPS and with SLPS. My soul is light because of the educational experience my children have received at Mason. Conversely, my soul is in anguish because I know their experience is not available to every child in this city. I recognize SLPS has many issues to face, and I implore you to face those challenges hand in hand with SLPS and their board to truly begin making the educational change our city and our community so desperately need. So rise up, Alderman. Now is the time to do the work, to start building those foundational relationships you need to inform the decisions you make with this committee and beyond. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is Ray Cummings with AFT.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? I apologize for the alarm going off in the background right now. I didn't want to miss this opportunity, and I'm presently at dialysis. They will cut the alarm off in just a few minutes, and, and I'm going to proceed with my remarks. I want to thank the committee for allowing me to come and to present to you today. Um, our organization is over 80 years strong, and we represent over 2,000 employees in the St. Louis Public Schools. As a matter of fact, we represent the largest number of employees. I'm going to, in the first part of my brief remarks, I will cover some ground that's already covered because I think it's important that committee members understand the role that our organization, the American Federation of Teachers, Local 420, has been a part of the process. With that being said, just prior to the pandemic, the St. Louis Public Schools announced a potential closing of a number of schools. This decision caused considerable conversations throughout our community and even resulted in our board of alderpersons issuing a nearly unanimous vote resolution against the closing of schools. Then the pandemic hit and all our efforts turned to staying safe while continuing to educate kids. In January this year, Local 420 began holding education summit with small groups of various stakeholders, local politicians, including the present comptroller, Darlene Green, president of Board of Aldermen, numerous alderpersons, and the previous president, Dorothy Rhodey Collins, and vice president of the St. Louis Public School Board of Education, Susan Jones. As a result of those meetings, Local 420 asked, and many have agreed to support the following. Number one, moratorium, a resolution to impose a moratorium on the opening of any new schools in the city of St. Louis until there's a unified citywide education plan. Number two, fair share, a coordinated plan that will ensure that any TIFs and tax abatements, past or present, contribute their fair share of revenue to the school. Number three, comprehensive plan, a commitment to develop a citywide plan for schools located in the city of St. Louis in collaboration with the St. Louis Public School Board of Education. St. Louis Public Schools, for lack of a better metaphor, can be characterized as a tale of two districts. That is, one district in which many of our students are doing very well academically. Yet in the other, there is no dispute that many students have academic, social, emotional, and trauma-related needs. AFT St. Louis has long advocated for our students' need to succeed. While some would rather put their heads in the sand and refuse to acknowledge the reality, we are the education first responders who see the consequences of children's poverty, lack of health care, traumatic situations at home, and other circumstances that interfere with the child's learning. St. Louis has just 4 full-service schools, formerly known as community schools, far fewer than in the past, partially because of shameful budget cuts. St. Louis Public Schools servicing those students not doing well that I referred to earlier could be transformed as students and their families have access at the school site to wraparound services they need to grow and thrive. Students and their families should be able to tap into health and dental services and have access to psychologists, social workers, and guidance counselors to help with trauma and other mental health difficulties, made even more urgent by the isolation during this past year's pandemic. Many students are in need of mentoring, tutoring before and after school, and enrichment programs, food and clothing banks, and other services and programs that more affluent families take for granted. Washers and dryers should even be considered so parents can engage more with their child's school and teachers while doing their laundry. We know that when these supports are provided at schools, kids can concentrate on lessons, not being hungry, sick, cold, or emotionally troubled. Evidence from school districts across the country have created full service type school shows they help to improve student outcomes and can make a real difference in the lives of children and their families. This is a far cry from the scant at best evidence that comes from school privatizing efforts, despite those advocates' puffed up claims and promises. With the support of Superintendent Dr. Kelvin Adams, we will work tirelessly for expanding the number of full service schools. It's time that our district got its fair share for a fair shot at providing St. Louis, the city of St. Louis children need to succeed. AFT St. Louis is proposing that the state legislature in the next session help fund the development of additional full service schools with $2 million, the same amount that the legislature gave to the Opportunity Trust, would support privatization models that have poor track records of success. Further, AFT St. Louis proposes a challenge campaign to direct to the St. Louis Public Schools a fair share of revenue derived from tax abatements and other economic development incentives. These voluntary step up to the plate dollars will reclaim for our next generation some of the money that the city has given away to business. We have a rare chance to seed a renaissance in the St. Louis Public Schools. Now is the time not only to reopen our schools fully and properly, as well as help children recover academically and emotionally, but also to reshape our schools in a way that makes every public school in our city one in which parents want to send their children, educators, and support staff. Thank you very much.
I think we lost you there. We can hear the beeping. I can't hear you speaking.
Madam Chair, Mr. Cummings asked to hear his remarks, and I was able to hear his remarks until it cut out.
Yeah.
Audio. And I believe he's asked if we have any questions, or he made himself available graciously to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from committee members? All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Cummings, and email over. I think you already emailed your remarks, and thank you for doing that as well. And thank you for your time today.
I emailed you a package of information surrounding the full service community school. I also sent the members op-eds that I've had published around this subject recently, and I will send Terry my remarks so that you can be privy to them. Once again, I apologize, but I didn't want to miss this opportunity, even though I'm at the house. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Tracy Spy still here? Yes.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
Certainly. No, thank you for holding this hearing and for listening to our comments today. I want to congratulate some of our new alders, Alderman Page and Alderwoman Schweitzer and Alderman Stevens. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to see all of you as members of this committee. And I'm going to be looking forward to working with you and holding you accountable for doing some great things. My name's Tracy Fantini Spies. I've been a resident of the 11th Ward for 15 years and an SLPS parent since 2013. Many of you know me from many of the issues I've worked on over the past few years. My kids have attended 4 SLPS schools, and over the past 8 years, and I have served as a volunteer at each of them. I was the president of Classical Junior Academy's PTO for the past 2 years, and I now serve as the district affairs officer for the PTO. And in that time, I've helped build partnerships with other schools and parents from across the district. And I'm very passionate about public education and access to quality public education for all children. I understand its vital role in our community, and I know that the district has problems. I think we all know that, but I'm committed to working towards solving them, no matter how difficult they are and no matter how long that takes. And I'm here today to ask you to do the same thing. The notion that city government officials and the Board of Aldermen have no power or influence over the barriers to the success of St. Louis Public Schools is simply false. As Dr. Roberts and Dr. Adams have pointed out, you have influence, and that influence is vital to the survival of St. Louis Public Schools. Public schools are the bedrock of our community, and we have seen that fractured by the opening of charter schools over the last 20 years. And please believe me, I am not anti-charter. I believe all parents, I don't begrudge any parent's choice to seek the best educational opportunities for their children. But I have seen what that has done to our schools and our community over these last 20 years. SLPS is under serious and imminent attack by well-funded organizations who are determined to privatize our public schools. This would be disastrous to our children and to our city. At the state level, the privateers have 10 lobbyists working toward this goal, 10, while SLPS has only 2. And we need you and your voices to advocate for the district and our children. We need you to take an active role in defending our city and our city's children and our school district. There are several ways that you can do this. We've heard already the biggest, I think, role the board can play is in regard to tax increment financing. We've heard what the $126 million lost over the last 12 years could have done for our children. In addition to keeping schools open, it's all of the services that our schools desperately need, that they're just starting to get because of the pandemic dollars that's coming in from the federal government right now. But just very basic services, all the, just social workers, nurses, counselors. My children's school, in fact, none of my kids' schools have ever had a full-time nurse. It's always been shared with another school. This is a very basic need. If we can't even put, nurses and counselors and social workers in our school, how are we going to meet the needs, the great needs of the kids in our district? And so, we have to find better ways to fund our schools. This is not a problem I know you all can solve, but you do have the power to oppose tax increment financing. And I would urge you, because I know that it is vital to businesses coming, and I have lots of opinions about that I won't share here, but we can keep TIFs, but we can change the laws and the rules so that those TIFs exclude public school taxes. So yes, we'll give you your tax incentives, but you got to pay the ones that support the schools. That is something that could be done. I have spent a lot of time talking to various alders over the years, and several of you already understand this, but it's been aldermanic courtesy for a long time to support other alders' requests for approval for TIFs in their district. So I would ask you to take another look at that. And as Dr. Roberts, I think, pointed out, I would ask you to think of our schools first instead of last when you're considering those votes. The other thing that I would ask you to do, I think it was Alderwoman Schweitzer who asked, how can I advise the parents in my ward when they ask me about schools and school choices? What I would urge all of you to do, please, I beg you to visit all of the schools in and around your wards. Okay, that is how you can advise your constituents on schools. Is you need to get to know them because they're wonderful. Okay, our public schools are wonderful, and our neighborhood schools are wonderful. Our magnet schools are wonderful, and we have to. We have to see them as the hubs of the community that they are. And you can't do that if you've never seen them, if you haven't seen their children, if you haven't met the teachers, if you haven't met the principal. If you haven't done that, then you can't possibly understand what these schools mean to these communities. So I think I've gone over probably my 3 to 5 minutes. So I just want to end by saying, we need you to get engaged and we need you to get involved. This can't wait. And I look forward to meeting with you and working with all of you. And again, I would just ask you to support the district's call to action. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tracy. Emily Hubbard.
Hi, thank y'all for letting us speak to you. Thank y'all for having a committee for youth and children. And it says children and youth matters, and I keep hearing it like Black Lives Matter, children and youth matter. And as a mama for Black biracial children in the city and in St. Louis public schools, a lot of times it does not feel like our children matter. And I just want y'all to act like you believe that neighborhood school children matter. Please vote yes on the moratorium. We don't need more disinvestment in our neighborhoods. Don't have the humility to work within the system to make changes happen. I can't do this. It's not working out for me here in this school. So I'm going to do my own thing. And we need leaders. We need the people who are connected to our children to be able to collaborate and to work within difficult systems. And the way that you can just pop up a charter school whenever you want and nobody can do anything about it is it's just not wise. So I know that y'all don't have the power to actually stop charter schools, but you can create an atmosphere of close scrutiny. You can ask people who are trying to start them if they really need to do this, if they really want one. Have you thought about it gets all the donations and philanthropy so that it can be the school that all our children deserve? I also want to speak to the importance of St. Louis public schools as an institution. I've been listening to the disbursement of the city money, that committee, and they were like, we need to partner with SLPS to get these to the families that need it. And if we don't make sure that SLPS remains as a viable institution by creating this moratorium and to get the ball rolling that it will start, then SLPS may, stop existing, and we won't have one central body to coordinate with. It will be, who knows how many different charter school systems. I love SLPS. I love our neighborhood schools. I want St. Louis public schools to be stable enough to deal with the problems that we do have. We have problems. There are things that need to get fixed. It's not perfect. But it's really hard to both deal with the inside and the outside forces that are making them less than ideal schools for our children. And I just, there's been a lot of talk about
Emily, I think we're losing you.
when we do our citywide plan. One of all my kids were at the neighborhood elementary school, my daughter, and our schools are have these schools that are sort of, or certain neighborhood schools be the only ones for people. They're not where, you know, it can make things change. That's not the school for. And I think we really need to talk about that. Sorry, I'm probably just too, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back now.
Sorry. I don't know what all you heard, but our daughter's gifted magnet school has $30,000 in their PTO budget. The neighborhood school has $0. And that sort of inequity creates haves and have nots within our public school system. And it's bad, and we need to change it. And I know y'all don't have the power, but you can be the leaders. You can ask the people who have the power to address this, to say, hey, you send your kids to the magnet schools, to the gifted schools for your own children instead of spreading them around. When it comes to TIFs, I understand that something happened where they made the arrangement where they gave money to the Affordable Housing Fund. It must benefit SLPS students. It needs to be affordable housing for families. It's very hard to find affordable housing when you have a bunch of kids like we do. It could be direct giving to neighborhood schools instead of to a fund. Like, I want the people and see who they're impacting. Created a youth council and listened to them. There was one in Charlottesville that has just been doing really amazing work. We have great kids in this city, hearing their input and making that happen in a formal way. And if I can do anything to help.
I think we lost you again, Emily.
I'm here.
You're going in and out a lot on us. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it's probably my kid's internet. I'll write all this up, but we need a youth council to help lead us. That's what we need. Thanks.
Thank you. And please do send over your remarks. Thank you. And our last speaker today is Jennifer Elam.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Hopefully you can hear me. All right. So my name is Jennifer Elam, and I'm the proud parent of 2 SLPS students, 2 sons, Brant, who's a rising 3rd grader with significant special needs, and Connell, a rising kindergartner. And we're residents of the 18th Ward. And I'd like to speak about how our city has prioritized tax incentives, abatements, TIFs, and several other tax breaks for developers at the cost of our kids in SLPS. I've been downtown to the TIF Commission, to LCRA. I've seen this happening in front of my eyes. I've testified to them as well. As for most school districts in our state, a large proportion of the SLPS budget comes from property taxes. For every $4 in property taxes collected in the city, only $1 goes to the city's general fund and $3 goes to SLPS, among a few other entities. By directly lowering the future property tax on the property being built, tax incentives we give to development projects today essentially steal from our schools' funds, often for 10, 20, or even 30 years into the future. The argument is often made that the developers will not be able to make money on their projects if they are not given an array of incentives, and they won't build new, exciting projects in so-called blighted areas if they won't make money. In reality, developers plan and choose their projects carefully, often in locations in the central corridor where rents for commercial and residential developments have been historically the highest in the city and are rising. They know how to make money. They are charging premium rents. They are attracting high-profile companies such as Square as tenants. The developers are in no danger of going under, and they have no intention to leave St. Louis. Most of the developers are from St. Louis, grew up here, and mean to stay. The entrenched tax incentive scheme has kept SLPS from meeting the needs of our city's kids for decades, and this has got to change. It's time that the city government, the mayor, her appointed staff, and the board of aldermen start thinking about consequences of the millions in incentives given each year to developers and taken away from our kids. It's time for St. Louis City to change the system to support our children, for their future and the future of our city. Thanks for allowing me to make comment.
Thank you. And oh, my dog is deciding to bark right now as soon as I go off mute. Sorry about that. Just about to adjourn the committee. I think the last